For over 30 years, ACL has invested in the University of Colorado, the University of Minnesota, and the University of Massachusetts to conduct national longitudinal studies to examine financial and programmatic trends in residential and community-based services, to track information related to the settings where people with intellectual and developmental disabilities live, and to identify employment information related to best practices states and providers use to obtain positive employment outcomes for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Every year, these programs produce robust reports for use by educators, researchers, and policymakers. These data tell a story, but it's not a story that is easily comprehended if you don't work in the field. So these three grantees came together to figure out how to tell the story in a way in which it can be useful to everyone, to self-advocates like me, to family members, to teachers, and to anyone else who cares about the quality of life of people with intellectual or developmental disabilities. Not only does this publication contain the stories that the data tell in plain language with exceptional graphics, but there are literal stories in here too, all from the people with IDDD who make up the advisory committees who guided every step of this project. Like every initiative at ACL, we could not do our work without these self and systems advocates. We're so thankful to all of them, and you're very lucky that you'll get to hear from many of them in their own words. I also want to thank the three grantees, the State of the States in Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, the Residential Information Systems Project, and the Access to Integrated Employment Project. Being that community living is in our agency's name, you might think we have innumerable publications like this, but we don't. We needed these 30 years of longitudinal data to truly tell our history and where we are today. So now I will turn things over to the grantees to hear more about this product.
Hi, I'm Sherry Larson from the University of Minnesota's Institute on Community Integration. I am the principal investigator of the Residential Information Systems Project, which is one of 3 longitudinal data projects of national significance funded by the Administration for Community Living. And I'm here today to talk about a new product, a new resource that summarizes the results from 30 plus years of research on community living and employment. Philosopher George Santayana once said, "Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it." We want people with disabilities, families, advocates, support providers, and lawmakers to know this history so that we don't repeat our mistakes and so that laws and programs can be improved. This book describes the experiences of people with intellectual or developmental disabilities who receive paid supports. People with developmental disabilities have trouble with things like speaking, learning, caring for themselves, living independently, or managing money. Their difficulties start before age 22 and require ongoing support. Intellectual disability also begins before age 22. People with intellectual disability have difficulties with practical skills, social skills, and academic skills like reading and math. Intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities are similar, but they're not exactly the same. For example, some people with developmental disabilities have autism or cerebral palsy, but do not have intellectual disabilities. This story is about a population of about 7.4 million people in the United States who have intellectual or developmental disabilities. That's 7 of every 100 children when you include young children with developmental delays, as well as 1 of every 100 adults. Across all age groups, state IDD agencies support fewer than 1 in 5 people with intellectual or developmental disabilities, but they serve about 2 of every 5 adults, or about 40% of adults. Of the 1.3 million people served by state IDD agencies, about 910,000, or about 62%, are people who are 22 years old or older. This story is about the then, the now, and the not yet of community living. A story from Bruce Ennis, an attorney from the New York Civil Liberties Union, that was recorded in 1973 in a President's Committee on Intellectual Disabilities report said this: "When I first saw her, she laid nude in a small, dirty, solitary confinement cell. She wouldn't talk to anyone, wouldn't even hold out her hand. Tests could not register her IQ. We placed her in a program with one staff member for her, 3 shifts a day. In 4 months, I went back to visit her. She was dressing herself, feeding herself. She played a record for me and showed me the paintings she had done. She also talked to me." The difference between life in a institution and life in a setting where there's sufficient enrichment and opportunity are striking. For almost 100 years, people with intellectual or developmental disabilities had to move to institutions to get an education or training because public schools did not provide educations to people with severe disabilities. Many people entered institutions as young children and never left. By 1967, nearly 200,000 people with IDD lived in state institutions. Half of those people were children. Institutions were miserable places to live. Helen Betchold said this about her life in an institution.
Shortly after I was born, my parents gave me up. I went to a place called Grafton State School. I lived there over 30 years at Grafton. A lot of hard work, scrubbing on floors, hands and knees.
Things began to change in the 1950s and then 1960s as institutions got smaller and began to close. In the 1950s and 60s, parents and advocates demanded changes to improve the lives of people in institutions. Congress passed laws to improve institutions, to provide public education to all students, and in 1981, to fund services in home and community-based settings. By 2017, fewer than 20,000 people with intellectual or developmental disabilities remain in state IDD institutions. 30 Years of Community Living is a product that was produced in direct consultation with a team of self-advocates who advised us on what to include, what not to include, how to say things so that they could understand it. And one of those advisors was Max Barrows. He said, "People with disabilities deserve to live in the community without being segregated. When we are included, people see what we have to offer." Communities are better when everyone is included. Being included means living, working, and spending time off with family, friends, and neighbors. For adults, community living is about choosing where and with whom we live, our friends, what we do in our free time, and how we earn and spend money. Some people want to keep institutions open or create new ones, but research tells us that people who live with a family member or in a home alone or with a few other people have better lives and make more choices for themselves. Today, things are better than they were even 30 years ago. Today, 4 of 5 people who lived in an institution 30 years ago live in community homes. An estimated 85% of all children and adults with IDD live with family members throughout their lives. Some of those people get paid supports, others do not. By 2017, among people getting paid supports, most lived in community homes. More than half, or 58%, lived with a family member. About 12% lived in a home of their own, alone or with a roommate. About 5% lived with a host or foster family. And only 1 in 4, or about 25%, lived in a group home or in an institution. Medicaid made a big difference. In 1967, state-funded institutions were the only option to receive supports paid for by public entities. But in 1973, based on reports of the horrible conditions in institutions, Medicaid was initiated and offered money to states to improve conditions in state IDD institutions. By 1987, 9 out of 10 people getting Medicaid-funded supports lived in a Medicaid-funded intermediate care facility for people with intellectual or developmental disabilities. Things changed dramatically between 1987 and 2017. By 2017, 9 out of 10 people getting Medicaid funded supports lived with a family member or in a home in the community. By then, there were about 860,000 people with intellectual or developmental disabilities receiving home and community-based supports, and only about 73,000 people living in an ICF-IID facility. By 2017, 17 states had closed all of their large IDD institutions. 6 states did not have any Medicaid-funded institutions for people with IDD by 2017. But we're not done yet. There's been tremendous progress over the last 30 years in improving the lives of people who receive paid supports, but we're not done. There are still 103,000, almost 104,000 people living in nursing homes, psychiatric facilities, or group facilities shared by 7 or more people with intellectual or developmental disabilities. People living in different states have different opportunities. In some states, most people getting supports live with a family member, but in other states, most live in a group home or an institution. Some group homes are doing well, but others are doing poorly. It's not easy to get a home of our own. Not every story has a good outcome. Some people go through 3 or 4 providers before finding the right place. Here are some of the other stories that their self-advocate team shared as we were preparing this report.
My biggest community transition was I graduated from high school, and the biggest issue there was I left all of my high school friends, so I had to make friends. And depending on the person or place, they need to rebuild that friendship. So for me, I definitely had to rebuild.
Well, I've lived in the community since 1990, and I've had a home, and the community has welcomed me. I'm not saying the situation I'm in is perfect, but I like living in the community, and some of the places I visit, like I like the hardware store. I live in a suburb where it's like a city and a town, and some of the stores really value me and like me and as a customer, and I gotten to know them. They're not my friends or anything, but they are people you want to see when you need a copy for something, for like human services.
Having a robust home and community-based system and having an entitlement for home and community-based services, will make our lives easier in terms of getting the support with, cleaning, cooking, budgeting, transit to, doctor's appointments, job support, job coaching.
I've been living up here about like 5 years now. The neighborhood I live in is particularly safe, which I like. They know me, I know them, like within my own neighborhood. So it's just like a safe place, really.
I think we need to do a better job of educating and giving the skills that people need so they can live on their own, but also allow them to fail.
I'm getting assistance through that and getting PCA. I don't know if you're familiar with that, as a personal care assistant that comes in that helps. And that companionship as well has been particularly good. And getting me outside, really. Because now I've been fully vaccinated. I've had my second shot for the COVID, so I'm in the clear now.
We need to pass the HCBS Infrastructure Act, and we need to make home and community-based services an entitlement.
Put your money where your mouth is. Are you going to invest or not?
Our nation's social and political intentions and priorities can be recognized by how we spend our public funds. Hello, my name is Shay Tanis, and I'm the principal investigator of the State of the States in Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Longitudinal Data Project of national significance. And we follow the money. Our project has captured over 40 years of longitudinal data to investigate the trends in spending by public funding streams that support people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We also investigate how those funds are used giving us insight into programs, services, and the impact of policies across states and the nation. We do this investigation in partnership with our professionals at the state agencies for intellectual and developmental disabilities, and we thank them for their years of collaboration that has made this project possible. In 2017, over $72 billion public dollars were spent on intellectual and developmental disability services and supports. The public investment in advancing access to opportunities for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities has shifted significantly over time. While we had seen substantial investments in institutional spending in the late 1980s, that priority shifted with the deinstitutionalization movement and the advancement of community-based integration and inclusion. On the screen now, you will see spending charts that looks at spending over time, comparing institutional settings to those in the community. In 1977, $12.3 billion were spent on institutional settings, while only $4.1 billion were spent in community living. In 1989, the community spending surpassed what was institutional spending in our states. And in 2017, $64.4 billion were spent on those in the community, as opposed to $7.2 billion in institutions. The US average for annual spending per person in 2017 in public institutions was $294,000. Compare that to what was $49,000 per person in the home and community. So while we have seen this shift from the community to the community, we've also seen that it is more cost efficient and effective to allow people to live in their own community environments. 90% of all spending in 2017 was dedicated to community settings. But as every state is different in their administration of programs and services, so is how they fund those services and programs. We have tracked the deinstitutionalization movement through investments in public and private institutions and in nursing homes. We have tracked the advancement in community living through expenditures for public and private residential settings. We have also tracked what is supported living, personal assistance, and family support. Through this investigation, we have found that while many people want to live with their families and remain in the family home, only 4% of the 91,000 families are supported through state agency funds. And while we identify investments, we have to find a way to allow states to be compared, to know what the national trends are. We apply a unique measure of fiscal effort to compare investments for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities across the states. Fiscal effort tells us just how much a state spends on intellectual and developmental disability services, considering their own state wealth. So how does your state fare in expenditures for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities? Take a look at our 30 years of community living publication, and you will see. But community living is so much more than just where we live. It is an experience of belonging and inclusion in everyday routines in our society.
I'm lucky that I have supports and government programs that allow me, but if I didn't have that opportunity, I don't think I would be in my own home and in my own apartment. But the other thing, in that general sense, those that want to get married or want to have a bigger community, how do you grow that when you don't, when money is an issue, or supports and services are there to allow that to happen when money is a barrier?
Also, we need to pay direct support providers a livable wage. When staff turnover a lot, especially when people have job coaches, oftentimes the employer will say, sorry, you can't work today if your job coach is unable to show up. Something that I had when I lived in Vermont. Staff turnover is traumatizing. It raises our anxiety and stress levels, predictability. and reassurance is one thing, many of us in the autism world depend on.
My top three things that I would like the government to invest more in for people with disabilities are employment opportunities, housing, and transportation.
My friends have a cell phone. Why can't I have one? Technology and the help of others can help me become more independent.
Technology is woven into our social fabric, from how we receive information and communicate to how we navigate and participate across different environments. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities recognized the importance of technology by stating information and communication technologies and assistive technology play a critical role in enabling and empowering persons with disabilities and ensuring that they fully enjoy human rights and fundamental freedoms. However, digital and technological equity remains an obstacle for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families. This challenge is constructing new walls of isolation and segregation between people with disabilities and greater society. Since 2007, the State of the States and Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Project has been capturing the public and financial investments in technology solutions and the trends in technology use, barriers to use, as well as the advancement of system change efforts like Technology First. In 2017, spending for technology solutions for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities was less than 1% of overall spending of supports and services, despite the advancements and interests in modern technology solutions like smart homes, telehealth, navigation and transportation technologies, remote supports, and broadband. We were able to identify, on average, 12 different funding authorities in the states to purchase software, hardware, and digital solutions. However, the barriers of digital and technological literacy, agility, and resilience are rarely funded. As we move into the future, post-COVID-19 pandemic, we see a digital transformation of services and supports to more customized, hybrid approaches that include in-person and technology solutions. It will be our job to track those investments and trends to promote digital and technological equity.
I do have my work computer and my iPad. That I can navigate pretty well for the most part. Yeah, I can. And my phone is pretty basic.
Technology is really important because I use my phone. I'm on a computer. I have an iPad, but I also use a lot of other devices, or could use a lot of other devices. But the biggest issue is broadband and reliable internet throughout the general community or places of work. So if I want to spend good money to get a good plan without my parents helping me or any other people helping me, I would have to pay a fortune to get good internet or broadband or data caps.
Technology is very important to me. I have technology on my face right now as you look at me. My glasses, someone created technology so I can see and actually be independent in the community. And so that's one. And also with I was born needing a hearing aid because I was born hearing impaired. So technology has been a part of my life since I was 3 years old with my disability.
Technology enables us people with disabilities to work from home. It allows us to, Zoom into meetings, see people like you. It allows us to, take care of stuff that may not that may be easier just to, order online versus, going in person.
Hi, I'm John Butterworth, and I work on the Access to Integrated Employment project at the Institute for Community Inclusion, UMass Boston. Individuals and self-advocates are clear that employment's a priority. The advisors for this project told us we want real jobs and meaningful ways to spend our days. For those of us who work, we should receive fair pay, not less than people without disabilities, And we want to have an opportunity to move up the career ladder. Ashley Wolf sums this up well, saying, "I don't just work to have a job, I work to live." The focus on employment in the general labor market began in the 1970s and emerged as a policy priority in the 1980s. Supported employment was defined in the Developmental Disabilities Act of 1984, and supported employment funding and systems change grants were first authorized in the Rehabilitation Act amendments of 1986. We know how to do this. Over the past 40 years, there's been steady innovation in our approach to employment support that includes creative approaches to career planning and discovery, customizing and creating jobs, self-employment, the use of personal networking, and robust engagement of family and friends in the job search process. I encourage you to read Maggie's story about finding a good match with a marketing and communications company, a job that was built to meet their needs and Maggie's interests and skills. There has also been renewed commitment to employment and Medicaid policy, in workforce policy, and in state-level employment first initiatives that challenge us to focus on the goal of integrated competitive employment and to ensure that there's a pathway to work from school. There's been a lot of progress, but we continue to struggle with shifting funding and supports to meet this vision. First, a couple of key terms. When we talk about work, we mostly talk about competitive integrated employment. A competitive integrated job is simply a person working in a job in the local community in a job that's available to anyone. The Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act adds that to be considered a competitive integrated job, the person needs to earn the same wage as their peers, work alongside coworkers and, when appropriate, customers who do not have disabilities, and have opportunity for advancement. Because of the history of employment supports, sometimes we also use the terms integrated or community employment. Community employment is a little broader and may include work situations where a person is working in a small group, commonly called group-supported employment, with full-time support from a job coach or employment specialist. Medicaid and vocational rehabilitation policy are clear that group-supported employment is not a preferred outcome. But because group-supported employment has been a part of employment services for such a long time, it's sometimes included in data on community jobs. It's also, of course, important to be part of the community when you're not working. The term community life engagement captures the vision of people participating as a full member of their community in other ways. Community life engagement might include volunteering, taking classes, or going to the gym. Shifting funding and supports to community life engagement instead of program or center-based services is also part of our challenge. Max Barrows notes that not being part of the community is a human rights issue. So what are the key things we know? First, only about 20% of people who receive supports from a state IDD agency work in a community job. Most of these people are working in a competitive integrated job, but a few of them are working in group-supported employment still. Or said another way, fully 8 out of 10 people are not yet working in the community. Second, people who aren't working in the community are clear that they want to work. Almost half of the people who receive supports from a state IDD agency and who don't have a community job say that they want one. That represents over 240,000 people waiting for a job. But here's our challenge. Only about 40% of the people who say they want a job report that they have a goal in their individual service or person-centered plan that focuses on finding a job. It's clear we need to listen more closely. We know that the type of job individuals have matters in terms of their outcomes. Of the people who work in community jobs, most, about 75%, work in an individual competitive integrated job, but about 25% still work in small group jobs, often called a mobile work crew or enclave. Small group jobs do need to be in the community, but they don't provide the same level of opportunity or the same employment relationship with a company. A few key points. People in small group jobs are likely to be paid by the employment program that supports them rather than the business that they work in. In 2017, people in group-supported jobs also only earned about $70 per week, while people in competitive integrated jobs earned an average of $117 a week. That means that many of the workers in group-supported jobs are making less than minimum wage, with an average hourly wage of only $5.60. So how are we doing over time? We are making progress. This picture summarizes the people who get a day or employment support or service from a state IDD agency going back over 30 years. The total number who get day or employment supports grew to over 640,000 in that time. Employment has grown steadily, though the growth stalled for about 10 years between 2000 and 2010. Since 2012, the number of people in integrated employment started to grow again, and it's at almost 150,000, a 23% increase in those 6 years. At the same time, the number of people in facility-based or sheltered work has dropped steadily, including a drop of 26% since 2012. Our challenge, though, really, is creating a pathway from non-work activities to employment. Over most of those years, the number in non-work activities grew the most, though the growth slowed some in recent years. That large group mostly includes people in program settings like rehabilitation, but also people who are supported to be in the community. It's also important to acknowledge that over the past year, COVID-19 has had a huge effect on people's employment, with around half of people who were in individual jobs stopping work. You don't see that in these data, but we will see that impact over the next year. The rebound has started. People are returning to jobs or getting new jobs, but it will take some time to get back on track. The positive side of the pandemic is that we've learned a lot about improving our supports using virtual and remote options, using technology better, and providing people with more flexible and individualized opportunity. We also know that state policy and state strategy play an important role in whether or not people work. Said more directly, it matters where you live. Across the states, participation in integrated employment ranges from 5% of people who get a day service to 86%. There are 6 states where over 40% of people participate in integrated employment. And in the state of Washington, before the pandemic, fully 60% of people who receive a day support worked in a community job. I like to think of this as good news, that we can do substantially better. So why are states so different? States that have more people in integrated employment are doing a better job of implementing employment first policy and strategy. Employment first simply means that employment in community jobs should be the first and preferred option for individuals and for the use of state funding. Or in John Fenley's words, employment first is about making that your top tier goal in life and really striving to get a job and be part of your community. The higher performing states have clear operational policies and goals that support work. These states emphasize specific concrete goals, use funding differently, invest in training and capacity building that strengthens employment supports, and innovate and collaborate with partners, including vocational rehabilitation and education. States that build from the higher performing states model that you see here have consistently demonstrated stronger growth in employment outcomes. The challenges in employment, as in all of this story, still center around changing expectations and listening more carefully to what people want. The data also direct us to set audacious goals, shift resources, invest in capacity, and strengthen our partnerships.
I was going to a school, it's like VOTEC, and VOTEC is like a training school, and they had classes out there for people with disabilities. And they said, Heidi, you need a job. But they did it all for me and signed me up, and I worked at McDonald's. It wasn't about me being the person that chose to do it. And I was there for 7 years, and I left because I didn't like being picked on. I didn't like my disability being taken advantage of. And so now I volunteer, and then sometimes it turns into pay. And I like what I do, and I don't always love it, but I'm very happy.
Like why I do the kind of work that I do, it's important but I see it as being important because it is for me. So it's not because, okay, I want like a paycheck like anybody else would. So what I'm coming from, it's not all about the money, like getting paid for it. I like getting a paycheck. But what I'm getting at is not all about the money, it's about the work itself that you do it. I love what I do. I do it because I believe in it.
Employment is really important because I can contribute to the community via tax dollars and also other services or things that I provide. I do multiple jobs right now, so I'm benefiting in many different ways. The biggest thing about employment is the barrier to those government funding sources and other things to allow people to stay in their homes or stay with their insurance or whatever, but also allow opportunities like Social Security, retirement, other things like that to happen, but also bridge into other pieces of community. Like you might find a relationship, or you might find some of your best friends through work, or having an opportunity to allow other people with disabilities go into their own communities and teach that self-advocacy skill to people with disabilities, or encourage employers to adapt their way of training to people with disabilities and understand how to do it.
So now you've heard a snapshot of the content of this publication, and the question becomes what to do with it. ACL and our team of grantees constructed this product as a tool for knowledge translation. It isn't just a book to print out and put on your coffee table, although you can do that with it too, because it is beautiful. We want this resource to help generate new understanding of the lives of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and to use that knowledge effectively so people with IDDD can live, work, and thrive in their communities. This is a teaching tool, and by increasing the understanding of this research, we hope it can be used by more people, by policy influencers and educators, and people with lived experience advocating for their own rights and the rights of loved ones. And we want you to tell us how you're able to use it so that we, in turn, can assess if we're asking the right research questions. Does what we're studying effectively improve the ability of people with IDDD to live in and contribute fully to society? Does it help you to live a more self-determined life? Now, this work is based in the principles that ACL and our grantees all share. The principles of nothing about us without us, and that when we know better, we do better. However, it is a different type of product for this field, so I want to turn back to our presenters for one last question. Can you all please sum up what is the significance of this resource? And let's start with Shay.
Thank you, Dana. Well, the significance of this product is tied to the significance of the data and what you can do with data, the power of data when it finally becomes accessible to you. The 3 projects of national significance have come together not only as projects, but also as co-collaborators with advocates. The advocates have guided us every step of the way, from the beginning manifesting and asking the questions that we should ask, through the research cycle, and to finally product design. This product was done in collaboration with them helping us tell their story of what is important, their story of the issues, and their story of where they hope for us to go. And I think the significance of this product is that it is accessible to the greatest number of people. That means legislators, advocates, family members, providers, and professionals to be able to use a product for data-driven decision-making as they advocate for the things that they want and they need for a better quality of life.
Thanks, Shay. I'm going to stay with the theme of stories. Data tells a story. I think all of us who are part of these projects love data for data's sake, but we really love data because it helps us know where to focus our attention. It lets us understand where gaps are, but also where our progress is being made. And it helps us to focus resources, to ask questions, develop strategy, and support change. But maybe most important, this work leads to conversations that come from sharing and talking about the data and collaborating with our key partners. That's advocates, of course, including some of the people who have been part of this presentation. But it's also the states that we have deep conversations with as we work to understand their data and what it means and integrate it with other states. It's policymakers that we have conversations with about how to use the data and challenge our systems to change. And it's about support priorities and working with employment and day service providers to do things differently in terms of making employment a priority in the work they do. Solving things like the gap between the number of people who want to work and the number of people who have a goal that takes them along that pathway.
Thank you, John. 30 years of community living is different than the reports we usually produce for the RISC project. The RISC project report has 1 million data points. It's written for researchers and states to understand the status and trends in community living across states and over time. But the information is complex and difficult for many people to understand. The Acl Longitudinal Data projects collect and report on decades of progress in providing quality community supports and services. Information from these projects has been used to help Congress and state legislatures make data-based decisions about policies guiding paid supports. The information has been used in class action lawsuits by reporters and by state agencies. The CDC's Healthy People 2030 goals use RISC data to monitor progress towards including people with intellectual disabilities in community settings. In this book, we share the story of paid supports in plain language. We include the stories and ideas of people with lived experience to help readers understand the impact of policy decisions. We want people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, family members, advocates, policymakers, direct support professionals, and graduate and undergraduate students to understand this history, learn from its lessons, and use the information to improve paid services and supports. We've made a ton of progress over the last 30 years, but we are not there yet. Our self-advocate partners were very, very clear that there is much that remains to be done. I hope this book will help us celebrate the progress that we've made, but also that it will challenge us to continue to address the needs that are yet unmet. We need to continue to monitor the progress we are or are not making in supporting all people to be valued contributing members of their communities.
You know, as COVID has shown us, you know, if we all live long enough, we'll all join the disability club. Climate change and disability are both intersectional and both nonpartisan issues. The time is now for us to design a system and a society that plans for living with a disability.
Ending of it all is that you want us to be in the community. You don't want us in institutions. Then how are you going to support us so we can live in the community and get the appropriate help? If I have the right person in my house, I can save you thousands of dollars where I can, with my little techniques and things that help me stay independent, I can save thousands of dollars at the same time that person comes 2 times a week to help me with the more important stuff.
If I can be in the community, there should be hundreds and thousands of other people that should be able to do that too. And people with disabilities should be there. But I also think that education of self-advocacy at a young age and into the community, school, work, play, religious positions of wherever a person touches a community or thing that makes them go round should be important and invest in those communities and educating people with disabilities.
In the next 30 years, here we should be focused on developing a robust long-term care system and designing a society and a system, you know, that plans for disability, acknowledges, you know, disability is something we're all going to face, you know, sooner or later, especially as the population ages, you know, and as the threat of more pandemics like COVID appear. You know, this pandemic reminds me of almost of the polio epidemic. You know, as that saying goes, it shouldn't have to happen to you for it to matter to you.